And just walking by that store window and looking at all those high-end stereos, and just, oh, that's so cool. That's so nice. And of course, I was a college student. I couldn't afford anything but bubble gum at that point. But after I got that job, I went down there. The first thing I did with my first paycheck, my first professional paycheck, was to go in and buy a Bang& Olufsen stereo system. And that at the time they had this little all-in-one unit that you just had to put your hand in front of it. The doors, these smoky doors, would slide open silently but real fast, and all the internal workings were there. Everything was touch and everything was hover, and it was all shiny and cool and amazing. And so I shelled out the money for it, called a cab, popped it in the cab, went home to my house over by the park, and got in my house, and with great excitement, unpacked it from the box and put it up on the little stand that I had gotten for it, put it all together, and sat there on the end of my bed and looked at it for a minute. I was like, wow, there it is. Look at that. And I went over and I put my first CD into it, which was probably ABBA. Played that thing, and it played the song. And I sat there and listened to part of the song, and the smile sort of disappeared off my face as I kind of came to terms with the fact that that's all it does. It plays a song. All of that investment, all of that beauty, all of that waiting, I get it home, pop it up on its stand, and put a CD in it, and it just plays music. And I sat there kind of seeing that, kind of realizing, wow. And it sounds almost the same as the jam box that it replaced. And so this is discernment. This is how we make it through this world. This is how we fuel our renunciation. You can't renounce properly until you know the value of things, what's valuable and what's not valuable, because we renounce because these things are not valuable. They are not helpful to us. They don't give us anything that leads us toward our realization, toward our freedom. And so when Ramakrishna calls them trash, he's not making a point. He's simply saying, all these things pass, all these things disappear, all these things rot, everything you get. And of course, now comes my 2 sentences on potting soil. The only thing that you can get in this world is potting soil. No matter how much money you spend on it, no matter how kind or pretty she, he, that is, ultimately potting soil, everything. And so the only thing that you can collect from this world is potting soil. And you're going to have to leave that behind, and they'll probably bury you in it. And so what good was it? What good was it to have these things? So Ramakrishna is showing us, always keep that discernment going. Don't be fooled by the stories and narratives around objects, around things. Those stories are pure karma. Master, yes, you gain much by visiting those things. You realize that those articles of gold and other things sent by Maharajas, that's kings, are mere trash. That is a great gain in itself. When I used to go to Calcutta with Hriday, he would show me the Viceroy's palace and say, look, uncle, there's the Viceroy's palace with the big columns. The mother revealed to me that they were merely clay bricks laid one atop the other. Any Christians have reminded by something in that little story? That exact scenario, that same little scene right there, happened with Jesus and Peter and I can't remember the other disciple, as they were walking through the city. And Peter was amazed at these, back then, all those columns, all those things that we see in ruins nowadays, all those things were standing. And the direct disciple says to Jesus, he says, wow, look at this. Isn't this magnificent? Look at this beauty, this architecture, this power. And Jesus turns to him and says, Peter, surely I tell you, the day is coming when not one stone will stand upon another here, And so you see in these greats, they see things as they are, as they are in their sum total, their value. Seeing that, yes, a beautiful building is just, like Thakur says, just a bunch of clay bricks stacked on top of each other into a shape. One day it will fall. And it's hard to imagine that. I had this experience when I was posted to the Washington, D.C. Center about 12 years ago. And I went to the country club that I had my first job in, because I was in seventh and eighth grade at that time when I first moved there when I was a kid. I only lived there for 2 years, I think. But I went to the country club where I had my first job, just to kind of, do the thing, see where I wash dishes. And when I got there and I drove up to the country club, it used to be a real swanky place. They had big balls going on there all the time and whatnot. And when I walked up to the front door, the roof had fallen in. The place was abandoned. It was no longer a country club. And I was like, oh my God. And I managed to jar the door open, and I went in and went down into the ballroom, and the chandeliers were still there, but they were kind of, half assembled and half broken and dirty and whatnot. The parquet floor had buckled up, and I, pushed open the kitchen door, and I could see the little dishwashing area where I used to wash the dishes, and all the dishes were still there. They still, of course, the shelves were broken and some of them were busted on the floor, but it was all still there. But to sit there and look at that place was such a strange experience for me. The last time that I was there, I was 15 with my first job, and the place was a real swanky, fancy thing for the Potomac, the Potomac Valley congressmen and rich politicians and whatnot that all lived there on the banks of the Potomac. And what a strange feeling to stand there and feel that time, to feel that 30 years that had passed since the last time I had seen that, when it was a functioning, beautiful thing, and now it was a ruin. And it was within my lifetime. I mean, I used to wash dishes there. My life happened in there. And now it's a ruin. I was like, wow, look at this. You can't go back. This world really is temporary. It really is just a constant flow of unrepeating change. So that's why he says here, after he says about the building, look, they're merely clay bricks laid one on top of the other. God and his splendor. God alone is real. The splendor has but 2 days of existence. The magician and his magic. All become speechless with wonder at the magic, but it is all unreal. The magician alone is real. The rich man and his garden. People see only the garden. They should look for its rich owner. Mani Malik to the master. What a big electric light they have at that exhibition. It makes us think how great he must be who has made such an electric light. Master to Mani. But according to one view, it is he himself who has become everything. Even those who say that they are he. It is Satchit Ananda itself that has become all, the creator, Maya, the universe, the living beings. The conversation turned to the museum. So that we talk about this quite a bit, and we're talking about it more lately because it's one of my favorite topics. Is the notion that we're in God's mind here, and that nothing is as it's represented. It is the same as in a dream, and we can talk about that. I don't want to keep giving the same examples over and over, but that in a dream you can chop a piece of wood and it will act like a piece of wood and it will look like wood, and you can saw it and get sawdust and all of that. But is it a piece of wood? No, it's in your dream. It's a piece of mind. That's all it is. But it looks exactly like wood, smells like wood, feels like wood, everything like wood. And so in this room right now that you're sitting in, everything that you're looking around at, you're not looking at the thing itself. You're looking at the symbol that the mind has created from the data that it got from the instruments. But you're not seeing light. You're not seeing a couch. You're seeing the symbols that your mind created. And so everything that you're looking at right now is also being misrepresented. The chair I'm sitting in, as I touch it here, I am not touching this chair. I am touching the symbol of this chair, and the feeling that I'm getting from it is interpretation again of the information that's coming down the nerves of my arm to my head. And so my mind has created what I see here. And so the only thing we can study in this world, this is the funny thing about it, the only thing we can study in this world is the mind. Because we can't actually get at the thing itself. We do not know and have no way of validating what the thing itself is. Where is this information coming from that the mind is interpreting as chairs and lights and houses and people and floors and whatnots, when all we get to work with is the symbol. And so this is what Ramakrishna is saying. This is all fleeting. It is not what it seems. It's all magic, and the magic is fleeting. It's one thing in one moment and something else in another. Right? Is that not true? It's like you take metal and pound it into a Mercedes, and then it gets melted down at some point and recycled into a bridge part, and that gets knocked down by a huge ship and goes to the bottom of the sea. It's like nothing stays what it is. A human body, right now, this human body is a swami. It's sitting here and it's talking and carrying on and being animated and having a good time. Come back in 30 years, it'll be a bucket of potting soil, a bag of 3 pounds of ashes, mother says. It won't be, it won't be saying much. It won't be thinking much. So this is discernment, to walk through the world constantly reminding yourself, all of this stuff that I'm looking at is only this today. In time, it will become something else. Everything is always shifting. That's why we're interested in that which is unchanging alone, that which does not change. And so I remember Swami Prabhupada, telling me when I asked him, where is that unchanging thing? there's nothing that doesn't change. Even I change. And he said, well, do you consider that which is looking? That in you which is looking for the unchanging. That is the unchanging, right? And so then you take that and you learn to make a practice of the fact that everything that changes is indicating the non-changing, the unchanging within. And that unchanging within you is in the shrine of the heart. And it has to be found. And once you find it, you sit and do your practice there with it. And in time, you move your sense of I from the world of changing, from describing yourself from the inside out. You move it, you shift it from here, to the unchanging. And here you know that you are the witness of the changing, but that you yourself are unchanging. And in that space, you create your own atmosphere, your own temple, your own shrine within which you live. And from that shrine, you watch the world. You make your offerings from Satchitananda within you. Right? So the conversation now turns to the museum, master to the devotees. I visited the museum once. I was shown fossils. A whole animal has turned to stone. Just see what an effect has been produced by company. Likewise, by constantly living in the company of holy men, one verily becomes holy. So he sees a very interesting, the way his discernment is going here. He sees this fossil and he's, look, that's the importance of company. If you hang out with stone long enough, you become a piece of stone. So he turns his mind instantly into a lesson for the devotees. Pay attention to who you're hanging out with. If you hang out with holy people, you become holy. If you hang out with worldly people, it's going to drag your mind down. There's nothing right or wrong in either one of those scenarios. It's just that one's going to get you where you want to go and one's not going to get you where you want to go right away. It's going to take longer. So, but the important thing here to see is that discernment is not what we do during meditation. Discernment is how we live. We are constantly walking along and reminding ourselves, what is the nature of everything that I'm looking at? Whenever I would see a beautiful person on the street, I would add 50 years to them, right? And be like, oh, okay, well, I can keep walking now, right? Take a look at myself in the mirror when I feel that vanity, right? Which is being severely challenged at this point in my life. Every day you go in there and the body's melting a little bit more, right? And if you attach to it, if you think this is you, then you mourn the loss of life. You think, oh my God, I'm growing old. Oh my God, I've only got 20 years left, right? But if you stay in this state of discernment, you're always free. And this is hilarious. Watching the mind, watching the mind go, that's how that can be hilarious. But just watching all of the things happen, watching your hair thin, which is the new thing that's happening for me. I'm very excited about all these little blemishes on your face that you didn't even see when you were in your 20s. This little guy that I got when I had chicken pox when I was like 5, it's been there my whole life. It didn't used to even be visible. Now I've had to give it a name. It's like everything is taking on its own character. And this is the beauty of spiritual life. This is the wonder of spiritual life, because we get to enjoy all of this. We don't have to live in fear and live in sorrow and live in terror and like, oh my God, I'm getting old. Oh my God, this, that, and the other. We don't take the narratives. We live in the moment. There's no narrative in the moment. There's no cause and effect. There's no story. And we live in that pure moment always without a story, just manifesting our nature, manifesting love and manifesting wisdom. And that somehow in the mind turns into a fulfilled life, turns into a loving and caring human being, right? And so we live in the moment, creating beauty with whatever is available, offering it back to the world and picking up another handful. This is where we go. This is how we live. Money, smiling. Had you visited the exhibition only once, we could receive instruction for 10 or 15 years. Saying, well, it's true, you walk with the Swami. I used to walk with the Swami. I don't remember his name because I didn't, because I just don't. It was 30, well, 25 years ago now, 20, 25, 26 years ago. I used to walk with the Swami up at Mayavati every afternoon at 4 o'clock. And, I just was taking his afternoon walk with him. But for that hour that I would walk with him, he would key off of everything and talk about the divine, talk about God. And it was so fresh because it was coming from him and his own experience, his own practice, his own being. And it was my first time in my life that I had actually talked to somebody who spoke about God without references. He spoke about God without references. That was the first time that I had met somebody that I knew the beloved, knew God, because he talked about him with his heart. And every single day he would cry. By the end of that walk, he would be in tears as he was just telling me more and more about the divine. So this notion, with Mani walking with the master, I said, boy, if you'd visit that museum anymore, you could teach us for days, because the eyes that see, the whole universe becomes scripture. The moment becomes scripture. The moment is divine. And we learn to read it. We learn to understand it. At first, yes, just to see things as they are. But once you get accustomed to seeing things as they are, then the deeper wisdom begins to come up. Yes.
I didn't understand when you said without references.
Oh, without references. Well, I grew up going to church. And whenever anybody said anything about church, they'd be like, well, over in John 3:16, it says that God so loves the world, and you can really trust that. He gave his own son. And Romans 8:28 says that all things work together for good to those that love God. And over in Revelations 21:8, it says that everybody who lies is going to hell. So that was how I grew up hearing about God. Anytime anybody was telling me about God, it had numbers. It had numbers attached to it. It had references attached to it. Nobody ever talked about God like they knew anything, like they experienced it, like they were with that beloved. And for the first time in my life in 1999 with this Swami, whose name I can't remember, he talked of God without reference. He talked about God from his own heart, from his own practice, from his own walk. And there was so much sincerity and love in it that it brought him to tears. I'd never seen that before. And never was he making any point. You know what I mean? He was never trying to convince me of something or to push an agenda on me. He was just sharing with another brother, me, just sharing, talking about what he knew and what he saw and what he understood. So by constantly living in the company of holy men, one becomes holy. Mani, had you visited the exhibition only once, we could receive instruction for 10 or 15 years. The master with a smile. How so? You mean illustrations? Balaram. No, you shouldn't go. Your arm won't heal if you go there. So Balaram's going to shut that trip down right away. Master, I should like to have two pictures. One of a yogi seated before a lighted log around a campfire. So he wants a yogi sitting around a campfire. and another of a yogi smoking hemp, and the charcoal blazing up as he sucks in on his on the chillum. I think that's what they call it, the chillum. Such pictures kindle my spiritual consciousness as an imitation fruit awakens the idea of a real one. Yes, because I've seen he wanted the picture of it, but when I got to walk up in the Himalayas, I would see in the caves, in the flickering campfire at night, the sadhus sitting around that campfire in meditation, doing their practice. And I remember seeing the sadhus that were out asking for alms, and they would have the chillum, and they would pull on the chillum, and then sit in meditation after that. And so Ramakrishna putting up pictures, and this in itself can teach us, there's Holy Mother right there, and there's my guru, Swami Ranganathananda there, that in your own home, you should put things around that put your mind on God, things that bring your attention to your ideal, whatever that ideal might be. It could be pictures, it could be poems, it could be scriptures, it could be whatnot. Back in the day, before I had really any particular religion, I was trying to create one of my own. And I remember I lived in an apartment, I had nothing on the walls. And so I took crayons. And at the time, I was interested in Druids and kind of an earth religion. And I had written in big rune script all these blessings on the walls around my room. So if you walked into my room, none of you would be here right now if you'd known me back then. You'd be like, this guy's nuts, man. But yeah, so do that, put those things that put you in a spiritual mood or bring you to a state of discernment, or remind you of the love of God, or remind you of the love that is dwelling within you, or to remind you that this world is not what it seems. Whatever you can find, whatever you can put up to help put your mind in that state and to hold your mind in that state will be really great. So I tell people, when we put together a shrine, we don't do anything else in front of that shrine except worship, and you should pick an incense, and you always put the incense in when you start. Why? Because it's a mental trigger. The mind knows, the smell of incense, it's time for meditation. Oh, I'm sitting in the blue chair. It's time for meditation. You sound a bell, gong. It's time for meditation, right? And you take the beads and you put them in your hand, and your fingers feel the Rudraksha beads. It's like, it's time for meditation. And all those things come together, and this toddler of a mind might get a couple of seconds of concentration out of it. You never know. So you prepare, yourself. You've got a lot to push against. This world is always pulling the mind out into pleasure and entertainment and distraction. And you have to find ways of turning it back so that its attention stays here, so that you can actually slip into what will ultimately be your realization, which is already prepared for you in the shrine of the heart. You just have to go and get it. You have to move out of the world of change, stop being distracted, and find the place of silence and allow the mind to calm down a bit. And then all the gems at the bottom of the sea begin to become apparent to you. Your real nature begins to reveal itself to you. And your inner world, rather than just being kind of a blank dullness, slightly red when you close your eyes, becomes an infinite universe where you can roam through your truth and through your discernments and your knowledge. Such pictures kindle my spiritual consciousness as an imitation fruit awakens the idea of a real one. The obstacle to yoga, right? Yoga is spiritual practice. The obstacle to yoga is woman in gold, lust and greed, right? It's lust and greed. This whole world appears to us as it appears to us because of lust and greed. It's because of lust that we see people as male or female, good looking or ugly, fat or thin, rich or poor, nicely dressed or poorly dressed, having taste, not having taste. Just because of lust. Look at the infinite numbers of ways we judge each other, just from lust. And then you take on greed. What does greed make you notice? Oh, people's income. How people are coiffed, what kind of cars they drive, what kind of rings they're wearing, what kind of shoes they have on. And you're not just concerned about their stuff, You're concerned about your stuff because you have to have people thinking the right things about you as well. And so imagine all the things, all of these McMansions on the hill, they all come from greed, right? So this whole world takes an odd form just because of those two wrong seeds of thinking, seeds of wrong thinking, right? Lust and greed in there, me and mine, the source, the ultimate source of all of it, me and mine, egoism. Right? The real obstacle to yoga is woman in gold, lust and greed. Yoga is possible when the mind becomes pure. And by pure, what does he mean? It means a minimum thought of me and mine, right? I would say no thoughts of me and mine. That's the ideal. But Ramakrishna says it's very unlikely for us as normal folks to be able to completely efface our mind of me and mine. But we get it as close as we can, so that veil, the ego is the only veil that blocks us from seeing all of this as it is, which is a singularity, God, the divine, of which we are either a part or we are, depending on what level of consciousness you perceive it from, right? And so we come to understand these things. Yoga is possible when the mind becomes pure. The seat of the mind is between the eyebrows, but its look is fixed on the navel and the organs of generation and evacuation. That is to say, on the lower chakras, lust and greed, lust and gold, right? But through spiritual discipline, the same mind looks upward. Right? We discipline the mind. We train it to see by reminding it constantly of the nature of things, of the material world. And as we close those gates, that life energy in us, we won't be expending it anymore on our distractions. It accumulates, and through our discipline and our self-control, we bring it up. Bring it up through the system of the chakras, if you like. We bring it up there, and it brings us to different levels of awareness, different levels of seeing. This world appears very different, and it's not magical in that sense, because you can see for yourself that you can sit in a single room, and everybody in that room is sitting in the room having the same experience in the room. And yet some people will be in misery, and some people will be happy, and some people will be bored, right? We all have the experience that our karma allows us to have. And so we all live in our own universe, even though they bump together, and even though they have some consistency, because we're sharing a universal mind. But it's our local mind that colors it for us, that gives it meaning, that produces the narrative, that makes it either a mansion of mirth, or a house of misery. And it's your inner world, your karma, that determines how you will see it and how you will experience it. But through spiritual discipline, the same mind looks upward. It comes up and sees the sun. What are the spiritual disciplines that give the mind its upward direction? One learns all of this by constantly living in holy company. The rishis of olden times, they lived either in solitude or in the company of holy people. Therefore, they could easily renounce lust and greed and fix their mind on God. They had no fear, nor did they mind the criticism of others. In order to be able to renounce, one must pray to God for the willpower to do so, right? This is the thing in our practice. We should be going to God all the time. If you haven't realized God yet today, at some point tonight before you fall asleep, you should have a conversation with the beloved. Why didn't I realize you today? What do I need to do tomorrow that's different? What didn't I see? What didn't I understand? Please tell me how to do my practice better, tonight while I sleep. And take things to the beloved. Let the Lord be real. Let the Lord manifest himself. Let him start pulling a few coincidences that are just a little bit too much to be called coincidence. That's how we build our faith. That's how we build our life into a conversation between us as we think we're the body mind, and the beloved, which has become everything else, right? And so life becomes that conversation. And every action of the day becomes a prayer. And we become aware of every action that we take, that this is a prayer. I'm asking for something with this action. Is that thing I'm asking for in alignment with my goals, my hope of seeing the divine? Right? And so we give that prayer some focus. That's why Thakur says we bring it down to that one pointedness. Right? And we do that through discernment. The discerning, when we see things as they are, we're not as interested in them. And we gather the love that we would have spent on those objects, gather that love, and we hold it within. And little by little, we collect all of that love from all of the objects that we've discerned and renounced. We collect that love, and finally we have a big bundle of it pointing right at the beloved, right at the divine. And at that moment, when there's enough of that love gathered, enough discernment and renunciation to keep the mind clear, you have that vision of the divine. You catch a flash, perhaps, of the divine. In order to be able to renounce, one must pray to God for the willpower to do so. One must immediately renounce what one feels to be unreal. The rishis had this willpower. Through it, they controlled the sense organs. If the tortoise once tucks in its limbs, you cannot make it bring them out again, even if you cut it into pieces. The worldly man is a hypocrite. He cannot be guileless. He professes to love God, but he is attracted by worldly objects. He doesn't give God even a very small part of the love he feels for woman and gold, but he says that he loves God. Tamani Malik, give up hypocrisy. Right? Hypocrisy is just when you're there's a truth that we have to maintain as seekers. What we think, what we say, and what we do have to be in alignment. If that alignment is broken, you're a hypocrite. None of us want to be hypocrites. So keep your thoughts, keep your deeds, and keep your words in alignment. Make sure that you're not saying one thing and doing another. That you're not saying one thing and thinking another. Keep that harmony, keep that all of that in alignment. That's the only way to go forward in spiritual life. Because that hypocrisy, that lack of alignment, it prevents us from being guileless. What's guileless? Guileless is just that open-hearted trust in the universe, like a child. If your mother tells you something, I remember the first time I saw an African-American woman, I was 7 years old. I grew up in Germany, so that's why. I didn't see a person of color until I was 7 years old. And so I was in the commissary parking lot, and I saw this brown woman. That's how I saw her. I saw this brown woman walking across the parking lot. And I was like, my world suddenly got significantly bigger. I was like, and I remember grabbing my mom's arm, and I was like, Mom, look, that woman's brown. And my mother, of course, at the time, the words were different. She told me, oh, that's a colored woman. And I was a kid, I was 7. And she told me, I was like, well, I thought that if that woman lifted her sleeve on her shirt, that she might be red up on the shoulders and maybe green on her, back, because my mother said she was colored. If she was just a brown woman, my mother would have said, oh, that's a brown woman. But my mother said she's a colored woman. And I just imagined all of a sudden that I was just seeing the brown on the visible parts, but that her body had all different colors on it. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's incredible. I wish I could see all those colors. That's guilelessness. When your mother tells you something and you're just like, you take it for absolute truth and you're like, wow, right? Because you absolutely trust your mother. You have no reason to doubt what she says. And so to be guileless, we have to be in alignment. We have to have that purity. We can't have any of our alternative agendas and hidden agendas and whatnot that we often put together as adults. We have to let that stuff go and be what we are, be in alignment, and see this world as it is, and we will see it like with the wonder of children. Because your ego is really just a collection of assumptions that you've used to feel safe in a world that you cannot know. right? And so we've put on this clothing of egoism where we broke everything into manageable chunks of understandable pieces that we feel like we can control. And that allows us to not have to actually deal with the world. We deal with our idea of the world. And that seems safe because in this room, everything is nice and small. I don't have to think about the meteor that has just been hurled at us that's going to hit and blow up the planet in 12 years. I'm in my room and it's wonderful. So you see, to become guileless, we keep that inner alignment going, that harmony between words, thoughts, and deeds. And we keep that trust in the divine. We take that trust, we open that heart, and we keep our discernment running constantly to know the true nature of things, that this world is constantly changing. And we try to see the white screen behind the movie. We try to see that which is not changing in everything that we do. Let all of this change remind us or point at that which does not change. Right? All right.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes, Sean.
Okay, so I was wondering, like, something I've been thinking about is like, how do we sort of get past that feeling of vulnerability and smallness we have with respect to like the whole world, like practically
Yeah.
speaking?
Yeah. Well, of course, as you know, I mean, our problem is that we're identified with body and mind. We think that we're body mind. All of the yogas are really the answer to that question. So it's quite an involved answer. All of our practice is to bring us to that state. But in alignment with what we're talking about here, you would start by just hearing the fact that you're not the body and that you're not the mind. And so you take that information and you sit with it. You go into your practice and you go into your mind and go into your internal space. You know, first just be quiet, watch yourself breathe. And then when you're in there with your eyes closed, ask yourself, what is body? Right? And just become aware. What is body? And with your eyes closed, you know, start touching your hands like this. Okay, that's body. How does body communicate? Okay, through those feelings. All right. How does it talk to me? It talks to me through pain. When it's sick, how does it tell me that it's sick? Oh, it gives me that taste in the back of my throat. It gives me that weird sort of headache in the back, you know. It's like, oh, that's body. Okay, well, okay. So now become aware of body. Feel body completely. Open up to it completely and feel it all at once. And so you go through that practice. So when you've got this very good idea of what body is in your inner world, then you gather yourself apart from it. You look at it and you say, I'm not the body. Now you know what you mean when you say, I'm not the body. It's not just some conceptual thing. Now you've gone inside, you know what body is, you know how it communicates, you know how it feels, you know how it works. And so you gather all that, you put it in a box, you say, that's not me. And then you say, okay, mind. What is mind? And you look in your inner world, you're like, okay, well, I'm using it to collect all this information, but I'm not the one collecting information. I'm observing the mind collect information. And the mind has to tell me everything. I can't know anything of the mind until the mind has a thought and presents it to me. So clearly I'm not the mind because the mind has to inform me. And clearly I'm not the body because the body has to inform me. If I am the observer of those two things, by necessity, I cannot be those two things. I cannot be what I observe, right? And so that's how we get there. We come to know that, and then we start to say, well, what am I? Right? And that gets a little trickier because you can't put it in front of your senses like you just did with your mind and with your body. Those things you can put in front of you and look at and study. But the self, there's no way to see it. Why? Because it's your face as such, right? You know it's there, but you can't see it. You can see its reflection, and actually that's what you're living in. This whole world is a reflection of the self, but you're only picking a particular out of that reflection and saying, I'm just that particular. I'm not that whole reflection. And so doing this, we come to a notion of what we are. And when we marry that to our discernment that's going on around the nature of the world, right? And then we know that the root of all of this is the divine beloved. Satchitananda, and then it's actually God who is the observer in me. And it's God who is the battery in everybody else and everything else that I see. And all of this is God's mind, because I have never seen the source of this world. Then you start bringing it into the real. You start looking and saying, wow, what am I actually looking at here then? I'm looking at the reflection of God. You know, we know Eckhart Tolle, light is love. We think, oh my God, I'm totally engrossed in the light of God, the love of God right now. So we know the nature of God's love, that it surrounds us, covers us completely, right? We're breathing in. But that's God that's being breathed in. That's love. That's wisdom that's being breathed in. And, you know, just like God breathing that life into Adam in the moment to give him life, he's breathing that same spirit into me in this moment as I inhale to give me life, right? And this, little by little, it becomes more and more profound and more established and more clear. Then as you become changed, as you start weeding out the me and mine from your mind, you naturally become what? You become what you are, that Satchitananda, which was stuffed behind the ego and unable to express freely and equanimously, now begins to express freely, begins to express equanimically, something like that. It begins to share, and the world you live in suddenly changes. Well, not suddenly, but slowly begins to change, and it becomes less and less of a fearful place. And people begin reacting to you in a more loving way, because you're putting out that lovingness, and because you're not protected behind an ego. They feel your humanity. They can connect with you more easily. It becomes more and more easy to believe that the nature of this universe is love, that the nature of God is wisdom and being, and that I'm merely watching this play happen, that the body cannot harm me. I'm an observer of it. It cannot cross the chasm to touch me. You know, like in a dream, the dream cannot affect the dreamer. You know, somebody can kill you in the dream, but you as the dreamer are unaffected. You'll wake up still just fine in the morning. And so we start to live in a world that way, and we begin to see it. And the fear that we would feel when we're body identified, mind identified, diminishes. And the lack of love that we experience diminishes, because we're starting to respond with love. We're starting to act according to inspiration from within our own nature of love. And as egoism diminishes, it stops collecting judgments about everybody. It stops collecting notes on everything and everyone. And it starts to open up to just the moment. So I can see things spontaneously without defining them, without adding them to my narrative, without putting them in conflict with me and mine. And I can move in harmony with an intuition that's deep, with an awareness that's opened and focusing on everything. I move through the world knowing that it is my beloved, and that it is infinite and immortal. And there is no fear in that. And at the beginning, these are imaginations. We play with those imaginations. We work with those imaginations. But we must always remember that every single thing that we're looking at right now was one time just somebody's imagination. The room that you're sitting in started as someone's imagination. You know, you as a person started as an imagination in your parents' minds. So that which is imagined manifests, you know. And so that's why we do the mantra. That's why we keep the image of God within. That's why we do all of that practice, because it manifests, and then we see it and know it to be real. So that takes, of course, a long time, and that's a nutshell description of it. There's many other ways to do it. Any one of the yogas is another one of those ways of doing it. That was kind of a combination of jnana and bhakti there, of knowledge and devotion. So it's really for you just be earnest and sincere in your desire to know, place that out before the universe and go forward knowing that it will be answered. And don't reconsider that truth. Go and assume for the rest of your life, this will be manifested. I will know this. I will be free. And it has to come. Thakur promised it.
Thank you.
Surely. But the worldly man says he loves God. And turning to Mani Malik, give up hypocrisy. Mani, regarding whom? God or man? Regarding everything. Man as well as God. One must not be a hypocrite. And getting a little bit more direct there. It's like, no. We're not going to lose this in philosophy, Manny. I'm talking about everything, God and man. Don't be a hypocrite. You don't need to pull this apart into, break it apart and ask questions about, scripture. It's not the way to do it. How guileless Bhavanath is. After his marriage, he came to me and asked, why do I feel so much love for my wife? Alas, he is so guileless. Isn't it natural for a man to love his wife? This is due to the world bewitching Maya of the divine mother of the universe. A man feels about his wife that he has no one else in the world so near and dear, that she is his very own in life and death, here and hereafter. Again, how much a man suffers for his wife. Still he believes that there is no other relative so near. Look at the sad plight of the husband. Okay. Don't anybody take this personally. Look at the sad plight of a husband. Perhaps he earns 20 rupees a month and is the father of 3 children. He hasn't the means to feed them well. His roof leaks, but he hasn't the wherewithal to repair it. He can't afford to buy new books for his son. He can't invest in his son with the sacred thread. He begs for a few pennies from his different friends. But a wife endowed with spiritual wisdom is a real partner in life. She greatly helps her husband to follow the religious path, the spiritual path. After the birth of 1 or 2 children, they live like brother and sister. Both of them are devotees of God, his servant and his handmaid. Their family is a spiritual family. They are always happy with God and his devotees. They know that God alone is their own, from everlasting to everlasting. They are like the Pandava brothers. They do not forget God in happiness or in sorrow. The longing of the worldly minded for God is momentary, like a drop of water on a red-hot frying pan. The water hisses and dries up in an instant. The attention of the worldly minded is directed to the enjoyment of worldly pleasure. Therefore, they do not feel any yearning or restlessness for God, right? Because all that yearning and restlessness that they do feel inside is being interpreted as yearning and restlessness for all the objects that they believe that hold the qualities of God. That's why all of the things that we love or that we like or that we're attracted to, all of our desires, you know where they come from? They come from the divine self, wanting to manifest its infinite immortal nature in the finite world, because it has identified with the finite, with the body mind. And so for its security, it wants relationships. For oneness, it wants name and fame. For power, it wants money. For the bliss, it wants pleasure. So all the things that it can find in the world that mimic its intuitive knowledge of itself, it wants those things. As long as it thinks it's a body mind, it goes looking through the body mind to collect the things that it knows are true of itself through its nature. But it's being fooled. You can't become infinite in the finite, right? Swami Vivekananda said something very interesting. He said, in the finite, he says, why does everything go in circles in the finite? Do you remember him saying that? He says, why is it the planets circle the sun and the suns all circle a black hole at the middle of the galaxy? And why do the electrons circle the nucleus and the electrons? Why is everything in the universe going in circles all the time? And he gives a very interesting answer. He said, because that's the only way God can promote the idea of infinity in the finite. A circle is the only thing that has no beginning and no end. A circle is the only thing that goes on forever. And so because of that, God manifests in circles, in seasons, in repetitions, because that's the only way that he can describe her infinity is through that. Very interesting idea. People may observe the Ekadashi. What time is it? Oh gosh, it's 8:02. Why don't we stop there? That's a good place to stop, subject-wise. And